we are fighting and we have warriors again. And I think it's a really, really good time for Indigenous people in this country, and it's only going to get better and stronger.
Welcome to People of Yellowknife, the show that takes you to Canada's north, more precisely to the city of Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. This episode is about the Indigenous people on whose traditional land Yellowknife is built. I talked to Kathryn Lafferty, who is a counselor for the Yellowknife's Dene First Nation and who works at the Dissenter Center for Research and Learning. Kathryn, who is 36, had to face many difficult situations early on in her life, such as being in foster care and being pregnant at a young age. She wrote a book about her story with the name Northern Wildflower, and in November last year I met with her to talk about it. But before we hear from her personal story, Kathryn explains what changed for Indigenous people in the Northwest Territories in the last decades.
In the last, I'd say 50 years, there has been tremendous changes in our communities in the Northwest Territories. First of all, money came in with the gold mine. In the 1940s, Giant Mine came and opened its doors and started mining for gold. And before then, there was just the trade with the Hudson Bay Company. There was a lot of fur trade going on at that time. And so when money came in, Yellowknife really boomed, and a lot of people from the south started hearing about this place called Yellowknife and started coming here for work because they knew, it's a kind of a cash grab. We can go and we can have nothing, and then we can get rich. And so that's what actually ended up happening. A lot of families came here, and you can see that they are the ones that own the big houses, and they're passing their money on to their children and their children's children and stuff like that. And they probably bought these houses for $1 back in that day, and they just claimed the land in it. But the Indigenous people didn't have that opportunity. They were told that they needed to live in housing and they needed to abide by the rules in society. And so when, it came time for them to actually try to work, it was difficult for them to get a job. So they usually got the less paying jobs, like the laborious jobs and stuff like that. And then after the gold mine shut down, there was diamonds, and diamonds was the big thing with money. And when the diamond mines moved in, it was really hard for a lot of families to stay together because the diamond mines were way out in the barren lands. And so a lot of men had to go to work for 2 weeks at a time. And then they'd come back home and maybe go and spend all their money on drinking or whatever. And that was at the time, that was about 15 years ago, and you can see that there was a lot of breakdown in families, and that was because there was just this huge rush of money that came into the community, and they didn't really know what to do with it. There was just like all this money. So then, of course, with the economy changing, drugs come in, and all different kinds of things. Yellowknife really turned into a big city then when the diamond mines kind of opened. So yeah, my grandmother was born on an island with no electricity, no running water. She lived completely off the land, and that was what worked well for our people. We were content, and we had our own laws that we followed. We were really connected to the land and the spirit, and we have hunting grounds and trap lines all over, and they're still being used by people that still know those trails and those historic places, but those kind of things need to be kept alive through telling stories and passing that knowledge down, because our elders are getting older now, and those elders were taught by their elders, so that's how our oral traditions get passed down. And so yeah, it's for me, I haven't really seen the changes because I'm only 36, but my grandmother's definitely seen a lot of changes in her lifetime, because she went from living completely off of the land to living in the city or the town of Yellowknife, where before that there was no town there at all. Like the downtown area of Yellowknife was all blueberries, and that's where the Yellowknife Dene hunted for moose. So now it's just completely changed around since the 40s. It's just been booming and booming, and our people kind of got shuffled into a corner on the peninsula of Dilo, and then in Detta, which is a community about 30 kilometers from here. And so, yeah, there's been encroachment, definitely. There's been land encroachment and dispossession of homes. And that's another huge thing is the housing system. Our people lived in canvas tents and teepees, and we were fine with that. And we lived in community where our grandmothers lived with us and our aunties and uncles, and everybody kind of all lived together and helped each other. And when the government came in and said, here's a home, start paying rent, and your grandmother's going to go live in an old folks home and your kids are going to go to school, it divided up the family, and people kind of didn't know what to do anymore. And another thing was that our men were told, no more hunting, you have to start now working in an office. And, they tried to fit into that society, but unfortunately it was really difficult for them because they didn't have the education. And even if they did have the education, it was hard for them to find a job because they were discriminated against and oftentimes weren't even hired at all. So it's all of these, there's layers and layers and layers of issues that and barriers that Indigenous people face in the Northwest Territories, and they're still facing today, but we're constantly fighting.
When Kathryn told me about her childhood, it was hard for me to keep up because there were a lot of changes. She was born in Fort McMurray, northern Alberta. Then her parents moved to a city outside of Toronto with her, and after some time her mother broke up with her father and went to Calgary with her. Eventually they moved to Yellowknife, her mother's hometown. That's where Kathryn's life, quote, took a little bit of a turn.
My mom was drinking heavily at the time, and I was often dropped off at my grandmother's house. And so I say that my grandmother raised me from a young age, because really she did. Like, I think I spent a lot more time with my grandmother than I did with my own mother for most of my life. So I was always kind of back and forth, though, and I've had this tumultuous relationship with my mother for as far as I can remember, and I still do, because she still struggles with drugs and alcohol addiction. And it's also from her growing up and her numbing her own pain from the loss of losing her 3 brothers, particularly her little brother Rex, who went missing back in the 80s when I think I was only 1 year old. So that was really hard for her. So yeah, growing up in Yellowknife, once I actually ended up staying here because we did get shuffled to Northern Ontario, where my mom, I don't know for the life of her why, she moved us there with some strange man that she was dating at the time. But we lived there, I think, for about a year, and I was actually placed in the foster care system for some time, and that was really scary time for me because I was away from my family, and it was really like I didn't know what was happening to me, and I didn't know if I was ever going to see my family again, basically. Being in foster care felt like a life sentence for me. I don't really know how long I was there. I'd like to say I was probably there for about 6 months. It could have been more, it could have been less, but at that time in my life I think I was 10 years old or so, and I don't really recall. I feel like a lot of these memories that I have, I've blocked because they hurt. I think there was about maybe 10 children at one time. Like, there was quite a few children in that house, and they were ranged from babies all the way up to my age, and they were all Indigenous. And the parents were very strict and very uncaring, like go to sleep at 7 o'clock, and like just rules that were really just not fair and just not, conducive to, like a regular lifestyle, like family living. There was no like tucking in and good night, and there was no hugs or kisses. And Now, looking back, I realize that a lot of these foster parents do get into being foster parents, not just because they actually really sincerely care about the children, but it's because it's a paycheck. They're getting $1,000 a month or so, I think, per child. So when you kind of add that up, that's actually pretty good money. And so when foster parents go in and actually foster children, not caring about the child, but just caring about the paycheck, what ends up happening is they're just as neglected, if not worse, than where they were coming from in their own family. Because at least in their own family, they had unconditional love no matter what, even though there's some issues there. Like with my mom, having her children placed in foster care because of a domestic violence, like a partner that abused her, I feel like the system could have actually worked with her to help her instead of just clawing her children away from her and saying, oh no, you this is your fault. It almost places the shame on her even more. And thankfully, my mom was healthy enough to actually work towards getting us back, but lots of mothers give up because it's just so difficult, not having your own children beside you and feeling so ashamed of yourself for losing them. A lot of them just keep drinking because that's the only way they know how to deal with the feelings that they're going through, and it's really difficult to pick themselves back up and be like, okay, I've got to do this. And so yeah, she had many things coming at her. I don't know how she left her abusive partner, but thankfully she did. And I think that really changed me, and it kind of made me into a rebellious teenager. And so I was just kind of wild and just angry at the world, and angry that, I didn't have this perfect family that a lot of the people I went to school with had. And I was just, didn't understand why things were the way they were for my family.
As I have been growing up in pretty stable circumstances, being in foster care seems to be already pretty hard to handle for a child. For Kathryn, it didn't take long before another change came to her life.
I was 15 years old when I found out that I was pregnant, and I tried to put it behind me and not think about it. For some reason, I thought if I just didn't think about it, then it would just go away on its own. But obviously, I couldn't ignore that that I had a growing belly and a baby inside me. So I stopped hanging out with my regular friends and kind of doing all the things that I was doing before. I was drinking heavily and stuff like that, and I knew well enough to not drink, which is, thankfully, I didn't. And I told my family that I was pregnant, and everybody was pretty upset with me and wanted me to get an abortion and those kind of things. And I don't know why, but for some reason, I was just against abortion. I didn't want to do that for some reason. And so I went through half of my pregnancy not really thinking about what I was going to do. And when I finally said, okay, sat down with my doctor, and she sat me down and said, you need to really think about what you're going to do here, because you're going to have this baby. And I thought about my life, and I thought about, I'm living in a housing with my grandmother and my little sister. My grandmother can barely get by as it is. If I keep this baby, I'm going to be, I'm not going to be able to do all the things that I wanted to do. Actually, I didn't even really know what it was that I wanted to do, but I didn't want to put a burden on my grandmother. So I just told the doctor, let me have a look at these adoption papers, because she told me that that was an option, and I didn't really know how it worked. So she sent me home with 2 books of requests from people in Canada that were looking to adopt. And so I took them home and I read them, and one of them really stood out to me. It was a family in the further north in the Yukon, actually. Then they weren't able to have children. So that to me just kind of touched my heart, these people really, really wanted to have a baby and they weren't able to. And so I thought, I'll just talk to them and meet them and see what they're like. And I called them, which was really, really hard for me. I was alone too. And a lot of the things I do, when it's big decisions like that, for some reason I make them alone. I don't know why. I don't consult with my family and my friends, but I didn't tell anybody, and I called them, and they pretty much came to Yellowknife on the first flight and met me, and we went for dinner, and they were just the nicest people, and they were just generally, wanting a baby, and just the woman was a nurse. She was a head nurse at the local community clinic, and her husband owned a company, and they were not wealthy, but they were, middle class, and so I thought, I think I'm gonna make up my mind here. And I had conditions set with the lawyer that, I would be able to send the baby gifts and stuff like that throughout her life, and keep in constant contact with her until she was about 12 years old. And she would know me, and she would know that she was adopted and all those things, and she would have my name as her middle name. So I had all these stipulations in there set for her, and that she would know where she came from, and those kind of things. And so, yeah, when the day came when she was born, well, first of all, she didn't want to come out. The baby was not ready for the world, but she was almost a month overdue. She was really, really overdue, and I was in so much pain during the labor. It was really, really intense. And eventually, after, 2 grueling days of torturous labor, I finally was able to have a cesarean section. And so the doctors did the surgery, and her adoptive mother was in the room, and she was given to her adoptive mother right away. And that's kind of when my heart sunk. I was kind of that's when it really hit home. I was like, wow, okay, this is not my baby. I just kind of went through all of this pain and everything, and to give her away, it I think is the most selfless thing I've ever done and ever will do. And I feel like now I definitely have closure with that. And for a long time, though, it took me a long, long time to come to grips with the decision I made, and that I couldn't go back on it. I couldn't just change my mind and say, hey, I want my baby back. She wasn't my baby, and I had to really, really come to grips with that. And so when I was in the hospital, I after having her, it was really, really early in the morning, and I went to go just have a look at her. I had to get up and walk around anyway, and the nurses were telling me to get up, and so I went to just go look at her to see what she looked like, because I hadn't seen her. And she was so beautiful and so chubby. She was a really, really big baby. And I was just kind of admiring her through the window in the nursery. And then the one of the nurses on duty said, you're her mom. You can come on in, and, you can take her back to your room. And I was just kind of I had the opportunity at that point in time to say, well, this is an adoption here, and I probably shouldn't, but I didn't. I just took her with me and wheeled her back in her little bassinet to my room, and sat with her for a little while, and, undressed her and looked at her little body, and just saw how beautiful she was, and admired her, and, pet her hair and everything, and gave her kisses, and told her, I loved her. And yeah, it was definitely one of those moments in my life where I will never, ever forget it. I'll always remember that I had this beautiful little gift. And so when I finally brought her back to her room, or to the nursery, it just so happened, which is, throughout my life has been ironic like this. It just so happened that her adoptive mother was coming to come and see her. And it was just like in the movie, she just kind of stopped and was like, oh my gosh, she's changing her mind. And I think she was, throughout the whole entire thing, she was a little bit worried that was going to happen. She was probably told that I could at any moment change my mind, and she was prepared for that. But I think that at that time it just was really devastating for her, and you can tell that she was really hurt. And so later on in that day, the lawyer came to see me. She must have talked to the lawyer, and the lawyer came in and said, Kathryn, like, if you're changing your mind, this is this and this, and I kind of just was like, no, I'm not changing my mind. And I didn't really have too much of a conversation with her. I was really upset at that point. Yeah. And so when it came time to bring the baby home, everybody was kind of like surrounding us in the hospital room. And I felt very almost like out of body, like I wasn't even there. And it was like I was just being used for this other purpose that was greater than me. And so, not use, I guess that's not a good word, but there was some other purpose going on that was greater than me. And I was just kind of bearing witness to what was happening. And so, yeah, after she went to her new parents and her new home, we kept in contact, and I sent her birthday presents every year and, Christmas presents and stuff like that, and cards, and her family also sent pictures. So I have lots of pictures of her all the way growing up, even some home videos and stuff like that. And I did get to meet her when she was 12 years old in the city that she lives in now. She no longer lives in the north. She lives in the city. She's 20 years old now. Very, very beautiful. And I got to meet her, and that was really nice. So we don't have a relationship right now, and that's up to her. And I think since she's still kind of figuring her own self out, and at that age, she's not quite a teenager, but she's just becoming a young adult. I think that eventually, I hope anyway, that she'll eventually want to know who her little brother and sister are, because she does know that she has an extended family and other brothers and sisters. So hopefully one day she'll come over and visit us.
These were 2 chapters of Kathryn's personal life, but of course a lot more happened that doesn't fit in this episode. When she was older, she went to college and later to university, where she studied justice. Besides her first daughter that she has born when she was 15, she has 2 children who live with her, a son and a daughter. And although, or maybe because she was a foster child herself, she is now a foster parent of a teenager. Kathryn had a lot of turns in her life, and to me it is very impressive where she stands today. She is a counselor for the Yellowknife Dene First Nation, a group of Indigenous people in the Northwest Territories. She also works as a director of Indigenous education at the Dissenter Center for Research and Learning. I let her explain what that is.
It's a program where we bring students that are getting university credits through the University of British Columbia or through the University of Alberta in Indigenous studies. We bring them out on the land, and that's where they learn. They learn from the land, they learn from their elders, local knowledge experts, Indigenous faculty on topics such as colonization and decolonization. And they're getting a unique learning opportunity because when the students are brought on site, they're brought out to what we call an out camp, where they are living completely off the grid, just like our ancestors did. They're living like my grandma did, sleeping on spruce bough floor. They don't have a fridge. They don't have electricity. They don't have running water, so they're fetching water from the lake. They're doing everything like their ancestors did and learning what a difficult lifestyle that was, and how important it is to connect physically, emotionally, and spiritually to the land and to our community. Like together, we realize that, when we're living like that, we need to depend on each other for certain things. And so it's quite an amazing learning opportunity. And what happens with a lot of the students is that they're just transformed. They come out of the program after 6 to 8 weeks, and they are completely confident in who they are, in their identity. And that's one of the big takeaways from Dissenter, and why I work with Dissenter, because it is life-changing, and it is a solution to many, many social problems in our communities, such as, mental health, addictions, poverty, this education gap in the NWT. There's just so many things that Dissenter can help to find solutions for. And it's just an amazing program. So I'm really, really happy to be a part of it.
My last question during our conversation was what it means for Kathryn to be Indigenous in the current time. And here is her answer.
I feel like we're at a time right now in society where Indigenous people are finally being heard. And it's really nice to know that, we are able to say what we need to say without being told to sit down and be quiet. And we are being heard, and we are fighting, and we have warriors again. And I think it's a really, really good time for Indigenous people in this country, and it's only going to get better and stronger. And I think we cannot forget where we come from, and that our spirits need to remain strong, and that we need to respect the land, because we are definitely like the guardians of the land, and we kind of like protect our sacred spaces, and so we need to always do that no matter what we do. And I'm really thankful to be an Indigenous person today. And when I was growing up, I wasn't. I was actually ashamed that came from, an Indigenous family. And now I'm thankful, that I understand, because, I was ashamed because I didn't know why my family was the way they are. And now I understand why. It's because we were just, forced into assimilation. We were forced to be dependent on the government. And we were just forced to kind of like, fit into society when really we shouldn't have ever had to. And thankfully, my daughter and my son are going to grow up being proud of who they are. And it's completely different now. I look at my daughter and I'm like, wow, she wants to wear my moccasins, and she wants to like show them off. And when I was little, that's the last thing I wanted to do. I was so embarrassed that I had these clothes that my grandma made me that were just beautiful. And now I'm like, wow. So it's really definitely I can see the change, and I can see how we're being more and more respected. And that's from standing up for ourselves. And if we never did have this revolution that's coming, that's been in the making now for some time, then I think that we would still kind of be way back where we were. But I think we're coming full circle now, and I think it's a good time right now for Indigenous people.
That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have a question or feedback, you can leave a comment on my blog at jonas-schönfelder.de. There's a link in the show notes. People of Yellowknife is produced by me, Jonas Schönfelder. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.